Welcome back to a new era, guys. Anush here, and in today's video, I'm going to give you 3 tips to help level up your cinematic video and also help you make it a lot more unique. Something like this. Quick disclaimer, I'm sorry if it's a little noisy because I didn't realize there'd be a crazy amount of trains passing by every 20 seconds. So yeah, I apologize for that. But anyways, back to the video. If you guys enjoyed that little sequence, make sure you hit that like button. I'd appreciate you. And by the way, if you're looking to learn cinematic videos, creative visuals, or even just be part of an inspiring creative community, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'd love to have you as a part of this journey. Anyways, let's get on to the first tip. So my first tip for you is foreground. What foreground is basically adding subjects or other things in the foreground of your shot so it looks a lot more interesting. What this is gonna do for you is give you a lot of depth and make your images a lot more unique rather than just have a simple establishing shot with no other context than the scene itself. However, you don't really want to abuse this technique. You really want to be super tasteful about it. For example, if you're in a nature scene or whatever your environment is and you're with your subject, you could probably use things in the environment like trees or walls or something of that nature to come into the foreground while the focus of your whole image is on your subject. And outside of just using the environment for foreground, you can actually be a lot more contextual and kind of create your own foreground. For example, if you have someone walking to the car, going through your house looking for the keys, walking through the door, you can actually put keys in front of your frame, and that could create foreground for the person picking up the keys, going out the door to get to their car, and it adds a whole nother dynamic, which really levels up your shots. Anyway, that's enough for tip 1. Let's move on to tip 2. So tip number two, I don't really hear this being talked about as much, but I think it's super effective. And what that is dynamic camera movement on top of keyframes. So let me explain that a little bit. So to help explain dynamic camera movement, I'm just gonna use my phone because my camera's recording, so obviously I can't really do both. But instead of simply just panning, for example, what you can do to make it a little bit more dynamic per se is maybe tilt the camera this way a little bit. So as you view that pan, you get to see more camera movement and it makes it a lot more interesting to watch. On top of just that dynamic camera movement, you're still just panning, right? So you don't really have a field of depth per se in terms of like the actual camera movement. So what you can do with keyframes is that while you have this panning movement with tilting over, you can close in on your subject using keyframes, and it creates this amazing motion for your videos to look a lot more attractive. And another example of what you could do with dynamic movement is actually trace your subject in some sort of way. So what I mean by trace is following their actual movement. For example, if a person is opening a car door, pulling the car door open, and then sitting into the seat, you could follow all their motion by tracing the movement of their arm with your camera. So now that you have a better understanding of dynamic camera movement and what you can do with it to really make your shots a lot more interesting, let's move on to tip number 3. Anyways, so tip number 3 is gonna be Quirks. If you've watched My Hero Academy, you know what I'm talking about. But anyways, what I mean by quirks is basically being able to identify traits in your environment to use to your advantage. For example, if you're in a forest, most people would be like, oh, that's such a boring location, there's just trees. But what you could do, kind of make it a little bit more quirky, to say, is that you could take leaves and have them fall in front of your camera, and suddenly you have this really cool shot of leaves falling, or at least making it seem like it's falling in your forest area. For me, I'm in this cityscape kind of area, so I could use the gates or the benches or something like that because we're at this rail station. And once you're able to really identify quirks in your environment, what you can do, and what I do a lot, is actually use your own quirks to help amplify your videos. I, for example, like to dance a lot, and so I actually incorporate dance in a lot of my sequences, and that makes it super cool in its own way versus just having your general catalog of shots. There's people, for example, who can do like yo-yo tricks, or they can beatbox and they can use their beatboxing as a sound design transition. That would be really sick. Damn, I should do that myself, to be honest. Well, that's a pretty good idea. But yeah, the point of that is you tend to layer on the quirks of the environment and the quirks that you have yourself to kind of create this really unique flavor that only you have. Now, actually, now that we're kind of on a roll, I'm kind of feeling on a roll, let's go on a bonus tip. I think a really cool bonus tip that I add is, now that you have your quirks, right, that's kind of your own personal flavor in terms of the physicality of what you're filming. But you can actually take that another level up by kind of adding your own editing style type of element. And I know your editing style is going to take a lot of time to develop, right? But what you can do is add particular elements, For example, on top of my quirk, which would be dance, for example, I add glitch effects, and that's my style element per se in terms of editing. And now when you combine dance and glitch, I have this super unique flavor, and that's something you can do for yourself. And now as time goes on, you can keep adding quirks, you can keep adding elements, you can keep layering and developing your style, and then you'll probably create something so unique to you in a really cool and very developed way that no one else can replicate. By the way, if you want to know what pieces of camera gear I use to really help film my sequences, you can check out these videos right here, or wherever they are on the screen. So make sure to check that out. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. I upload every Wednesday, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace. I didn't have to say peace. I really didn't have to say peace.
No.